September 1944. The Vosges Mountains of eastern France lay shrouded in autumn mist, their pine-covered slopes hiding thousands of soldiers from both sides of the greatest conflict the world had ever known. At a forward observation post, perched on a rocky outcrop overlooking the Moselle River Valley, Private First Class Raymond Chasing-Hawk pressed his field glasses against his eyes and studied the fog-blanketed landscape below. He was 23 years old, a member of the Chiricahua Apache Nation from the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona, and he possessed a remarkable ability that his commanding officers considered almost supernatural in its effectiveness. 3 kilometers to the east, concealed beneath camouflage netting and pine branches, sat the remnants of the 21st Armored Division of the German Armed Forces during that era, a once formidable unit that had rolled across Poland, France, and deep into the Soviet Union before the tide of the conflict had turned against them. Their commander, Oberst Friedrich Brenner, had no idea that his carefully hidden position had already been compromised by a method of communication his intelligence officers had never encountered and could not possibly decode. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What was about to unfold in those misty mountain valleys would demonstrate how ancient wisdom, passed down through generations of Apache warriors, could overcome the most sophisticated military technology of the 20th century. It would transform the understanding of tactical communications forever and prove that sometimes the most advanced solution is one that predates modern civilization by centuries. Raymond Chasing-Hawk had grown up listening to his grandfather, Thomas Chasing-Hawk, tell stories around evening fires on the reservation. The old man had been a scout for the United States Army during the final campaigns against Geronimo in the 1880s, and he had taught his grandson the traditional methods of long-distance communication that Apache warriors had used for generations. These were not the famous smoke signals that Hollywood films depicted, but something far more sophisticated, a complex system of mirror flashes, hand signals, animal calls, and terrain-based messaging that could convey detailed tactical information across vast distances without any possibility of interception. The knowledge had been passed down orally for countless generations, with each technique refined and perfected over centuries of use in the harsh mountain and desert environments of the American Southwest. Young Raymond had spent countless hours as a boy learning to read the subtle variations in light patterns, to understand how different angles of reflection conveyed different meanings, and to memorize the intricate vocabulary of flashes that could communicate everything from simple greetings to complex tactical instructions. His grandfather had been a patient teacher, insisting that Raymond practice until the signals became as natural as spoken language. When Raymond had enlisted in the Army in 1942, following the attack on Pearl Harbor, he had initially been assigned to a standard infantry unit. But during basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, his unique abilities had caught the attention of Captain William Morrison, a Signal Corps officer who had spent years studying unconventional communication methods. Morrison had watched in amazement as Raymond demonstrated how he could send a message across a 2-kilometer training field using nothing but a small mirror and achieve a communication speed nearly equal to Morse code, all without any equipment that could be detected or intercepted by enemy intelligence. Morrison immediately recognized the tactical implications. The German forces of that period had developed highly sophisticated radio interception capabilities. Their signals intelligence units could often decode Allied communications within hours, sometimes minutes, giving them advance warning of planned operations. But how could they intercept a message sent through patterns of reflected sunlight that required not only visual line of sight, but also knowledge of a communication system that existed only in the oral traditions of a small Native American tribe? The captain spent several weeks testing Raymond's abilities under various conditions. He found that Raymond could communicate effectively at distances of up to 8 kilometers in good visibility, that he could adjust his techniques for different weather conditions and times of day, and that he could train other soldiers to receive his messages with reasonable accuracy within just a few days of instruction. The potential applications for covert reconnaissance and intelligence gathering were immediately apparent. Within weeks, Raymond found himself transferred to a special unit within the Signal Corps, designated simply as the Indigenous Communications Detachment. The unit eventually grew to include 17 Native American soldiers from various tribes, including Navajo, Choctaw, Cherokee, and Comanche members, but Raymond remained its most accomplished practitioner of visual signaling methods. While the Navajo code talkers would become famous for their radio-based code that was never broken, Raymond's unit operated in complete radio silence, invisible to any form of electronic detection. The unit underwent intensive training at a remote facility in the Arizona desert, where the terrain closely resembled the conditions they might encounter in European mountain operations. Raymond worked with Army intelligence officers to develop standardized message formats that could convey military information efficiently while still drawing on the fundamental principles of Apache visual communication. They created protocols for reporting enemy positions, troop strengths, vehicle types, and defensive installations, all using combinations of mirror flashes that only trained receivers could interpret. By September 1944, Raymond had participated in operations across North Africa, Sicily, and the Italian peninsula. He had earned a Bronze Star for his actions during the Anzio landing, where his signaling had coordinated a nighttime withdrawal that saved an entire battalion from encirclement. But the operation in the Vosges Mountains would prove to be his most significant contribution to the Allied victory. The situation facing the Allied forces in eastern France that autumn was complex. The rapid advance following the Normandy invasion had outpaced supply lines, and fuel shortages had slowed the push toward the German border. Intelligence indicated that the German military leadership had concentrated significant armored reserves in the Vosges region, preparing for a counteroffensive that could potentially push the Allies back and extend the conflict by months or even years. The problem was locating these hidden reserves. The mountainous terrain, combined with extensive German camouflage efforts and the autumn weather conditions, made aerial reconnaissance largely ineffective. Radio intercepts provided fragments of information, but the German forces had learned to maintain strict communications discipline, sending only brief coded messages that revealed little about their actual positions or intentions. This was where Raymond Chasing Hawk and his small team entered the picture. Colonel James Whitfield, commander of the 45th Infantry Division's intelligence section, had worked with Raymond's unit in Italy and understood their capabilities. He proposed an audacious plan: insert a small reconnaissance team deep behind German lines, using Raymond's signaling abilities to report enemy positions in real time without any risk of radio detection. The information would be relayed through a chain of observation posts stretching back to division headquarters, each manned by trained observers who could receive and retransmit Raymond's visual signals. The plan required meticulous preparation. For 2 weeks before the mission, observation posts were established along a carefully selected route through the mountains, each position chosen for its clear line of sight to the next station in the chain. Soldiers at each post received intensive training in recognizing Raymond's signal patterns, and backup procedures were established in case any link in the chain was compromised. The mission, codenamed Operation Autumn Leaf, began on the night of September 15th. Raymond, accompanied by Sergeant Thomas Whitehorse, a Lakota from South Dakota, and Corporal James Clearwater, an Ojibwe from Minnesota, parachuted into a remote valley approximately 12 kilometers behind the German front lines. They carried no radio equipment, only their weapons, survival gear, and small signaling mirrors that could fit in a shirt pocket. For the first 3 days, the team moved cautiously through the forested mountains, avoiding German patrols and observation posts. Raymond used techniques his grandfather had taught him for silent movement through wilderness terrain, methods developed over centuries of Apache life in the harsh deserts and mountains of the American Southwest. They traveled primarily at night, using the stars for navigation, just as Apache warriors had done for generations. Thomas Whitehorse brought his own traditional knowledge to the mission. The Lakota people had developed sophisticated methods for tracking and evading enemies across the Great Plains, and Thomas applied these techniques to the European mountain environment with remarkable effectiveness. He could read subtle signs in the landscape that indicated recent human passage. helping the team avoid areas where German patrols had recently traveled. His ability to find water sources and identify edible plants supplemented their limited rations and extended their operational capability. James Clearwater contributed expertise in nocturnal navigation that came from generations of Ojibwe life in the forests and lakes of the upper Midwest. His people had developed methods for traveling silently through dense woodland at night, using subtle sounds and the feel of the terrain underfoot to maintain direction without any visible light. These traditional skills proved invaluable in the dark pine forests of the Vosges. On the morning of September 18th, Raymond reached a vantage point overlooking a narrow valley that intelligence had identified as a possible concentration area for German armor. What he saw exceeded all expectations. Below him, hidden beneath elaborate camouflage that would have been invisible from the air, sat more than 120 armored vehicles, including the latest models of German heavy armor. Supply trucks lined a forest road, and fuel depots had been established in what appeared to be an abandoned lumber mill. This was not merely a reserve unit. This was the spearhead of a major offensive force. Raymond immediately began transmitting. Using his grandfather's techniques, he caught the morning sunlight with his signal mirror and began sending a complex series of flashes toward the first relay station, located on a hilltop approximately 4 kilometers to the west. The message detailed the exact position of the German concentration, the approximate number and types of vehicles, the location of supply depots, and the defensive positions protecting the assembly area. The precision of the information was remarkable. Raymond had learned from his grandfather how to estimate distances by observing how objects appeared at different ranges, and he applied this knowledge to provide coordinates accurate to within 50 meters. He identified command vehicles by their distinctive antenna configurations and reported their positions separately, recognizing their value as priority targets. At the relay station, Private Daniel Redhawk, a Cherokee from Oklahoma, received the message and retransmitted it to the next station. Within 45 minutes, the complete intelligence had reached Colonel Whitfield's headquarters, traveling across more than 20 kilometers of enemy-held territory without a single radio transmission that German intercept stations could detect. What happened next demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of precision intelligence combined with overwhelming firepower. Colonel Whitfield immediately contacted the Army Air Forces, requesting an emergency strike package. Within 2 hours, 3 squadrons of heavy aircraft were airborne, their crews briefed with exact coordinates provided by Raymond's observations. Meanwhile, Raymond continued his surveillance, sending updates every 30 minutes. He reported fuel truck movements, anti-air positions, and the location of command vehicles. Each piece of information was integrated into the attack planning, ensuring that the strike would achieve maximum effectiveness. Oberst Friedrich Brenner had spent the morning of September 18th reviewing plans for the upcoming offensive. His division had been rebuilding for 3 months following severe losses on the Eastern Front, and he finally had the strength to launch a significant operation. His orders were to strike through the Vosges passes, cut the Allied supply lines, and create chaos that would allow other German forces to stabilize the crumbling Western Front. Brenner was a professional soldier who had served since 1928. He had witnessed the rise of the German military machine, its great victories, and now its slow but steady collapse. He harbored no illusions about the ultimate outcome of the conflict, but he believed that a successful counteroffensive might create conditions for a negotiated settlement that would spare Germany the worst consequences of total defeat. He had chosen the assembly area personally, selecting a narrow valley where the steep hillsides would prevent aerial observation and the forest canopy would conceal his vehicles from above. His camouflage officers had done exceptional work, using local materials to create coverings that blended perfectly with the autumn landscape. He was confident that the Allies had no idea his division was concentrated here. At 11:37 that morning, his aide rushed into the command post with news that Allied aircraft had been spotted approaching from the west. Brenner immediately ordered his crews to their vehicles and anti-air gunners to their positions. But something was wrong. The attack was coming too fast with too much precision. It was as if the enemy knew exactly where every vehicle, every fuel depot, every command post was located. The strike lasted less than 20 minutes, Wave after wave of aircraft delivered their payloads with devastating accuracy. The camouflage that had fooled aerial reconnaissance for weeks proved worthless against coordinates provided by a ground observer. Fuel depots erupted in massive fireballs. Armored vehicles that had survived campaigns across 3 continents were reduced to smoking wreckage. The pride of the 21st Armored Division ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Brenner survived the attack only because his command vehicle was positioned in a stone quarry that provided natural protection from the bombardment. As he emerged from shelter and surveyed the devastation, his mind struggled to comprehend what had happened. There had been no warning, no intercepted radio messages about the incoming strike, no indication that the Allies had any idea his division was concentrated in this valley. How had they known? The question would haunt Brenner for the rest of his life. After the conflict ended, he spent years researching what had happened that September morning, eventually corresponding with American military historians and even former enemies. When he finally learned the truth about Operation Autumn Leaf in the 1960s, he reportedly sat in silence for a long time before remarking that he had been defeated by a method of warfare that his ancestors might have used against Roman legions 2,000 years earlier. But the story of September 18th was not finished. Raymond Chasing Hawk and his team had accomplished their primary mission, but their extraction had not been planned for another 48 hours. As the smoke rose from the destroyed German position, they knew that enemy forces would be searching the surrounding hills for whoever had called in the devastating attack. For the next 2 days, Raymond, Thomas, and James played a deadly game of evasion through the Vosges forests. German search parties, enraged by the destruction of their comrades, scoured every valley and ridge. Several times, the 3 Americans came within meters of discovery, saved only by techniques that had been developed over centuries of Apache, Lakota, and Ojibwe survival in wilderness environments. On one occasion, Raymond used a technique his grandfather had called spirit walking, a method of moving so slowly and deliberately that the human eye, adapted to detect motion, simply failed to register his presence. A German patrol passed within 5 meters of his position without any of the soldiers noticing the American lying motionless in the underbrush. Thomas Whitehorse later said it was the most remarkable display of fieldcraft he had ever witnessed. During another close encounter, James Clearwater used animal calls he had learned as a boy in Minnesota to misdirect a search party. His perfect imitation of a wounded deer drew the German soldiers away from the team's hiding position and toward a distant ravine. It was exactly the kind of deception that indigenous peoples had used for hunting and evading enemies since time immemorial. There was a moment on the second night when all seemed lost. The team had taken shelter in a small cave when they heard voices approaching. German soldiers were methodically searching the hillside, checking every possible hiding place. Raymond could hear their boots crunching on fallen leaves, coming closer and closer to the cave entrance. In that moment, Raymond thought of his grandfather and all the Apache warriors who had faced similar situations over the centuries. They had survived through patience, through stillness, through an understanding that panic was the greatest enemy. He slowed his breathing, relaxed his muscles, and became as still as the rocks around him. His teammates followed his example. A German soldier appeared at the cave entrance, his flashlight beam sweeping across the interior. For a heart-stopping moment, the light seemed to pause directly on Raymond's face. But the soldier was looking for movement, for the instinctive flinch of a hiding man. Raymond gave him nothing. The beam moved on, and the soldier called to his comrades that the cave was empty. On the evening of September 20th, the team finally reached the American lines. They had traveled more than 30 kilometers through enemy territory, provided intelligence that had resulted in the destruction of a major German armored formation, and returned without a single casualty. The mission was immediately classified at the highest level, and Raymond received his second Bronze Star, though the citation could say nothing about the actual nature of his service. The impact of Operation Autumn Leaf extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. The destruction of the 21st Armored Division eliminated the primary striking force for the German counteroffensive in the Vosges region. Without that armored spearhead, the offensive was cancelled, and the German defensive line in eastern France collapsed weeks earlier than it might have otherwise. Military historians estimate that this single intelligence operation shortened the conflict in Western Europe by at least several weeks and saved thousands of lives on both sides. But the story has a deeper significance that speaks to the nature of warfare, technology, and human ingenuity. Throughout the conflict, both sides had invested enormous resources in developing ever more sophisticated methods of communication and intelligence gathering. Millions of dollars were spent on radar systems, encryption machines, radio interception equipment, and code-breaking efforts. The technological arms race seemed to suggest that victory would belong to whoever developed the most advanced electronic capabilities. Yet here was Raymond chasing Hawk, using techniques that predated electricity by centuries, achieving results that no radio-based system could have matched. His method was not merely unbreakable, it was undetectable. German signals intelligence could not intercept communications that used no signals they were capable of monitoring. Their encryption expertise was useless against a code that had never been written down and existed only in the oral traditions of a small Native American community. There is a profound lesson here about the nature of technological superiority. The German military leadership of that era had built their strategy around technological advantages, their armored vehicles, their optical equipment, their communication systems. They assumed that technological superiority translated directly into military superiority. But technology is only one factor in warfare, and sometimes the most effective solution is not the most advanced one, but the most appropriate one for the specific situation at hand. Raymond chasing Hawk understood something that military theorists often forget. The most powerful weapon is not always the most sophisticated one, but the one your enemy cannot counter. Apache warriors had survived for centuries against technologically superior opponents by using the terrain, the environment, and traditional knowledge that their enemies did not possess and could not easily acquire. Raymond applied this same principle to 20th century warfare with devastating results. The wisdom of indigenous peoples, often dismissed by modern societies as primitive or outdated, contained sophisticated solutions to problems that continue to challenge military planners today. The Apache visual signaling system was not simple or crude. It was an elegant communication technology, refined over many generations, to meet the specific needs of people operating in challenging environments with limited resources. Its effectiveness in 1944 demonstrated that such traditional knowledge systems deserve respect and study, not dismissal. After the conflict ended, Raymond returned to the San Carlos Reservation in Arizona. He married a woman named Sarah Longbow in 1946 and raised 4 children. He rarely spoke about his wartime service, even to his family. It was not until the declassification of certain military records in the 1980s that his children learned the full story of what their father had accomplished in the mountains of France. Raymond spent his post-conflict years working as a rancher and serving as an elder in his community. He taught traditional Apache knowledge to young people on the reservation, including the signaling techniques his grandfather had passed to him. He believed strongly that this knowledge belonged to his people and should be preserved for future generations, regardless of whether it ever found military application again. Thomas Whitehorse settled in Denver, Colorado, where he worked as a surveyor for the State Highway Department. He used abilities he had developed during the conflict to help plan roads through the Rocky Mountains, and he often said that the Vosges operation had been excellent training for navigating difficult terrain. He and Raymond remained close friends, visiting each other regularly until Thomas passed away in 1992. James Clearwater returned to Minnesota and became a conservation officer for the State Department of Natural Resources. He spent decades protecting the forests and lakes that had given his people their identity, and had provided him with the abilities that saved his life and his comrades' lives during the conflict. He established a program to teach traditional Ojibwe wilderness techniques to young people on the reservation, ensuring that this knowledge would not be lost to future generations. Colonel James Whitfield retired from the Army in 1952 with the rank of Brigadier General. He spent his retirement years writing a history of unconventional intelligence methods during the conflict, though security classifications prevented him from publishing most of what he knew about Operation Autumn Leaf, until shortly before his passing in 1987. In his papers, he described Raymond chasing Hawk as the most naturally gifted intelligence operative he had ever known. Oberst Friedrich Brenner survived the conflict and spent 2 years as a prisoner of the Western Allies before returning to Germany. He eventually became a businessman in Munich, but he never forgot the September morning when his command was destroyed by an enemy he never saw using methods he could not comprehend. In his correspondence with American historians, he expressed no bitterness, only a soldier's respect for a superior adversary. He passed away in 1978, still wondering how the Allies had known exactly where his division was hidden. The legacy of Raymond Chasing Hawk and the Indigenous Communications Detachment extends beyond their immediate military achievements. They demonstrated that indigenous knowledge systems, often dismissed as primitive or outdated, possessed sophisticated methods and capabilities that could complement and sometimes surpass modern technology. This recognition contributed to a gradual shift in how military planners and intelligence agencies viewed traditional knowledge, a shift that continues to influence special operations and unconventional warfare doctrine today. In 2004, the United States Congress passed a resolution honoring the Native American code talkers and signal specialists of the Second Global Conflict, including a specific mention of visual communication techniques pioneered by Apache soldiers. Raymond Chasing Hawk was recognized posthumously, having passed away in 2001 at the age of 80. His family accepted the recognition on his behalf at a ceremony in Washington, where his eldest son, Thomas Chasing Hawk II, spoke about his father's quiet pride in having served his country using the ancient wisdom of his people. The Vosges Mountains still bear the scars of that September day in 1944. If you hike through certain valleys, you can still find rusted fragments of vehicles amid the pine forests, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Local residents know the stories passed down through generations, though few understand the full significance of what happened there. On a hilltop overlooking the valley where the 21st Armored Division met its end, there is a small stone marker placed by American veterans in 1984, on the 40th anniversary of the operation. It bears no names, only a simple inscription in English and French that reads, "Here, ancient wisdom met modern warfare, and wisdom prevailed." Raymond Chasing Hawk visited this spot only once, in 1995, accompanied by his grandson, Michael. The old man stood in silence for a long time, looking down at the peaceful valley that had once been filled with fire and destruction. When Michael asked what he was thinking, Raymond simply said that he was remembering his grandfather, Thomas Chasing Hawk, who had taught him everything important he had ever known. As the sun set over the Vosges that evening, Raymond performed a brief ceremony of remembrance in the Apache tradition, honoring the warriors on both sides who had fought and fallen in that place. It was not a celebration of victory, but a recognition of the human cost of conflict, and a prayer that such knowledge would never again need to be used in warfare. The story of Operation Autumn Leaf reminds us that the greatest military advantages often come not from the most expensive or technologically advanced systems, but from the wisdom, creativity, and adaptability of individual human beings. Raymond Chasing Hawk carried within him centuries of accumulated knowledge, passed down through generations of his people, and when the moment demanded, he used that knowledge to change the course of history. In an age when we increasingly rely on satellites, computers, and artificial intelligence for military operations, there is value in remembering that some problems are best solved by methods that have stood the test of millennia. The Apache warriors who developed visual signaling techniques centuries ago could never have imagined that their methods would help defeat the most technologically advanced army in the world in the forests of Europe. But they would not have been surprised that their knowledge proved superior to more modern alternatives in the right circumstances. That is the enduring lesson of Raymond Chasing Hawk's service. True wisdom is timeless, and the most powerful asset any warrior can possess is the accumulated knowledge of those who came before. Technology changes, tactics evolve, but the fundamental principles of observation, communication, and adaptation remain constant across generations. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.